Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Get Real with Jack and Cindy. I'm Cindy Morrison.
And I'm Jack Wallace. Welcome, everybody. We have a very, very special guest.
Very special. Miss Cindy Rogers is with us, and she's the president of GTAR, which is the Greater Tulsa Association of Realtors. And I said it right.
You said it right.
You're sitting right here in the room. I got to say it
I
right.
will say it wrong. You're guaranteed.
I might say it wrong. So don't feel bad.
I like it.
So anyway, we want to get some insight on some of the hot topics going on right now. And one of the biggest ones are the changes because of the NAR suit.
Right.
Now Jack and I have talked about it. We talked about it with Cheryl. We're getting awfully close to the deadline. You're right smack dab in the middle of this, having to write new contracts and things like that.
Yep.
So walk us through what in the hell is happening.
Oh, well, I don't know. But, I think that's, to kind of start there, I think that everybody thinks that those of us that are on the board or that are involved in these committees, that we have all the answers and we know everything. And you know what? We're a little lost too. So
You're not the wizard behind the curtain?
We're not the wizard behind the curtain, I'm afraid to say. But we've got great, amazing people working, and I'm really proud of the work that we have done and where we're at, and that we're so far ahead of this, because I know there's states and different areas that they haven't even started really talking about all this. We've been working on this buyer broker agreement since March.
Which is smart.
And hours and hours. I would guesstimate probably 40 hours easily.
And volunteer hours, might we say.
Hours.
This is not
Yeah, now
paid
OREC, that's obviously their job. But they have a contracts and forms committee. They graciously invited several people from GTAR and Oakmar and some other areas to kind of collaborate on this. And it was great because you know what we deal with in Tulsa and somebody deals with like in Ada could be very different.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was good to get everybody's input and insight. So we realized very quickly when all this started to transpire in March that we were going to have to make changes. And of course, at first it was this, and then it was this, and then it was this.
Mm-hmm.
It's remained pretty consistent the last couple of months. So I think there may still be some changes, but we just kind of had to start where we were at and work forward. So,
and something you said, just to clue people in, if you're a buyer and seller and don't know a lot about MLS, we have two different major MLSs in Oklahoma. We have GTAR and Oakmar. GTAR is with Tulsa, Oakmar is with the Oklahoma City
Right.
area.
A lot of other smaller.
Well, we have a lot of smaller boards, and they have their MLSs, but there's some of the surrounding areas, but the two biggest are Oakmar, which is the Oklahoma City area, and Tulsa. Correct. So we
you're
also
kind of a big deal.
Well, I never think I'm a big deal, but I guess so. So
to me, you're a big deal.
Thank you. To me, you're a big deal, both of you, and
Yeah.
so I'm very flattered to be here. And so, I'm flattered that I'm on, and that I'm honored. And I'm flattered and I'm honored that I'm trusted to take on this role, because if you know me, and if you know me, you know that I think there's 100 other people that'd be better at this than I am. And
which is exactly why you're the person who should be doing it, because I think egos have gotten in the way in so many things in the past, and a lot of this with OREC and with GTAR, and really right now what we are all finding out, and I think this has been sort of a negative utopia thing for us, is that all of the stuff that's being thrown at us and kind of accusing us of doing things and as some nefarious, like we're all in this kind of awful business to get people and do things to people. It's really about, let's all come together and show the public what we're about.
Right. And put the consumer first, which is what we do every day anyway. Yeah. And that was, so that the buyer broker agreement's intention is really to protect the consumer. But obviously we want to make sure that our industry and we're protected as well, because as we all know, we don't get paid until a transaction closes, and people don't really understand what that means. I was telling Jack before you got here, I have spent hours and hours, easily 80 to 100 hours with this couple. Now, if they never close on a house,
which has happened,
which happens,
It does happen.
I don't, so not only do we you know, I mean, I call it HGTV syndrome, you know, and my husband always laughs. He's like, well, how many martini lunches did you have today? Because, you know, that's what they do on TV. They just have a martini
Or
dinner. Or lunch
Bravo, the
yeah.
selling
make
network.
millions.
And make millions or
Mhm.
whatever, you know, so, but, you know, we work and we work and we work, and sometimes we don't get paid.
Mhm.
And so I think, you know, it was important that we protected, obviously, the realtor, but, you know, we wanted to make sure the consumer was protected. So I think the biggest change in the new buyer broker agreement, and to me, is that, or maybe not the biggest, but I mean, one of the most important is that it can now unilaterally be canceled by either party. So I think that protects the consumer when they show up, you know, and if they've called somebody off of a sign, they show up and they say, oh, you got to sign this, and they sign something for a year and they don't understand what it is because they think, well, I just got to sign it because they said it was the law and I got to go inside and I want to see this house, and so I sign it, and then they don't realize, you know, that they've signed something that binds them to that person for a year. And before that document had, I mean, for that agreement to be broken, had to be mutually agreed upon. And I think it's important, you know, from the realtor standpoint too. We might show up and meet somebody and just realize we're not the best person to help them.
Right.
And I think, you know, again, that kind of goes to speaking about putting the consumer first. Sometimes we aren't the right personality, the right person. That's not the area that we are the most specialized in or knowledgeable about. And we're better off to allow them to be served by someone else.
Mhm.
And so with the new buyer broker agreement, either party can cancel it or terminate it with 3 days business days notice. Now, you can't be under contract on a house and then decide the consumer can't just decide, well, my cousin Sally, you know, I forgot she was a realtor. Now I want her to help me so she gets paid. If you're under contract, they can't cancel it. So you're protected there.
They would have to wait out 60 days from after the agreement lapses. Then they could do that.
Well, if they're under contract to buy a house,
I'm
they
sorry,
can't
you're right.
come and terminate. No,
I'm
but it's
conflating
confusing because
things,
we're
yeah.
talking about, if they had an agreement and you didn't, you know.
If you showed them a house and then they went back with the cousin, they'd have to wait 60 days until after that agreement was done until they could do that.
Well, that's kind of a gray area. And it's kind of when we were talking, I mean, before I think you'd stepped out of the room and we were talking about procuring cause. And I think, so let's say that I go show you.
And for the public who's not aware, procuring cause, which is not easy for me to say, but I did say it, I think, is that if I've shown you a property, then I have we used to call it threshold rights. So I brought you over the threshold, which means that you are now my client, and it's kind of what this does, but you did it, and it was enforced most of the time.
Yeah,
so.
and I mean, I think that's why we got away from calling it.
And I don't agree with it necessarily.
Well, and I think that's why we got away from referring to it more as a procuring cause than a threshold, because just because you walked somebody in didn't mean you were actually the procuring cause of the sale.
Right.
You know, if I took you in and then left and went on my merry way, and then you went back in with another agent and they spent hours and hours and collected data and research and kind of walked you through the neighborhood, the area, the comps, you know, did inspections, you know, they would be the procuring cost. So let's say that Jack and I sign an agreement, and then Jack's the realtor, I'm the buyer, and I go down the street and, you know, I sign an agreement with somebody else, and Jack showed me 123 Main Street, and we've spent a lot of time there, and he had all the details and the information that I know he would have had with him when he brought me in to see it. And then this person does too, but this person ends up showing it to me, but she really just opens the door and lets me in, and that's it. Jack really could come back and say, hey, you know, I feel like I was a procuring cause. We both have a buyer broker agreement. And at that point you would make a complaint, to GTAR,
right.
OREC,
but you'd have a case.
and then it would have to be mediated and worked through in the same way that you would a procuring cause.
And that's even
case
like
now.
when I do new construction and I have people sit on those, I always tell them, if somebody came through before and the other agent was the person who was working with them, but then they come back 3 weeks later and they love you and you get them on the dotted line to sign,
yeah,
they're yours.
Yeah.
Like because keeping track of who came in the house that day when this person was there, and if they didn't click with them or they didn't get them over into a contract, then the person who does should have procuring cause. So
and let's and I do appreciate that buyers can still go to open houses and go through properties like that, because sometimes they want a little space to just kind of feel things out. They don't even know for sure if they're ready to move. They don't understand, I don't know. I mean, to me, and I mean, I think it's the same with you. Most of our business comes from referrals and past clients, which means we're doing something right. And so we already have a relationship, but we take for granted there's a lot of buyers who don't have that.
So your point on that is you need this form to show people a house if you're a realtor.
Yes. You're a licensee and you're not. If you're just a licensee, you do not have to abide by these. But if you're a realtor and you're a part of an MLS, you have to use these forms.
And not necessarily this form, but a form. This is the form we're choosing as a OREC board. But then the other thing that the times you wouldn't need it are if you're having an open house. People can come to an open house, and we don't need to have this agreement in order for them to walk in and for you to show them the house. But if they decide they want to go forward, then you have to go to this form and do that. The other would be if they're not a member, if they're just...
Yeah, I guess wholesalers would fall into that, or you've got real estate agents, not licensed realtors.
Do we have that in Oklahoma?
If they're not a part of the MLS, there are some smaller companies that do... They're non-MLS brokers. They'll go sell things, but they're not a part of MLS.
I didn't know we had that in Oklahoma.
They
don't have to be a part of NAR.
In our market, it's more, and I think I think there are some, but it's more prevalent in some of the more rural areas where, Joe's real estate agency has been, there for 50 years, and they're not going to join anything or do anything. They're just going to, do business with a handshake and down at the diner like they've done for 40 or 50 years, and that may work, and that's fine. Yeah. It should be a lot simpler.
I used to think that was so ridiculous. Now I'm like, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
But then the other thing that today we did the webinar, and one of the things they discussed was that if you have the listing, you also can show the property as the listing agent without an agreement, in the respect that if somebody's just wanting to see it, and you're not officially going as their buyer broker, but you're the listing agent, then you can show it without that. Is that correct? I mean, I don't think it's necessarily the right thing to do. But.
Yeah, and I think the premise of that is more like an open house. But if somebody's calling you from the sign and saying, "I'd like you to show me this property," if you are working for the seller and you are not working for that buyer, then,
the minute they decide that they want you to represent them.
But that's really a gray area. I mean, how do you know that they're not going to turn around and say, I want you to represent me?
But if somebody had, for example, a client or their realtor was on vacation, which I'm sure
never
happens, but if they're on vacation.
It hasn't happened to me for a while. I don't know about y'all. I can use one.
If their realtor is lucky and they're on vacation, that you could say, yeah, I'll open the house and let you look at it.
Yes.
And then there's no problem.
Yes.
Okay. But otherwise, pretty much everyone needs this form. They need to do it. Some of the things that I thought were interesting that were not in the previous version of this was first of all, one thing I thought was really interesting for realtors is there is an interesting thing in this that says if the buyer just decides basically to not close, which doesn't happen very often, but occasionally they'll just decide they don't want to do it. This does protect your, you would probably have to go through a court and do this,
right?
But it does state that they will go ahead and pay you the compensation, which we've never had anything like that.
Really?
So you and I are under contract. I'm your buyer. You're my realtor. We have been under contract for 45 days, and we are the day before closing, and I'm just like, I just changed my mind. We're not going to buy. And you're like, hey, you can't do that.
And I've had that happen.
And I've done all this work, and the new buyer broker agreement states that they will compensate.
Which I think is good for the seller too.
It is good for the
seller
because it puts a little, puts some skin in the game for the buyer.
Not just the earnest money.
Not just the earnest money, because sometimes they're willing to just say, okay, well, we'll give that up or whatever. And you're going to have to pursue it through legal means. And it may not be worth your time and energy to do that, but I think it is worth our time and energy.
I think it's very much.
We spend a lot of time and money, and again, and not getting paid, and it's taken away from our own families. It's taken away from other clients and other business. So then, for somebody to just for no good reason, other than they just change their mind, decide not to buy a property, they've put the sellers out, they've put the realtors out, they've put the, the
The house
mortgage
has been
lenders.
off
The house has been off the market, and
Yeah.
let's face it, if a house goes off the market and then comes back on, no matter what the situation, everybody always thinks something's wrong with the house, which is generally not the case.
So then let's go through some of the other things just
Okay.
so we make sure and cover it. So we talked about how you're going to need it. The buyer broker's agreement can be by the standards set through the settlement 1 day to a year. That's the somewhere in between. This is 60 days.
Right.
If you don't
put a date in
specify.
it, 60 days. And the reason I think that's important is because if you do get that sign call and somebody who's like, well, I don't know you, I mean, I don't want to sign this, you can extend it, you can revise it, but you don't want, and we don't want a consumer to do that.
Mhm.
We don't want a consumer to go sign something with somebody they've only met, for 30 minutes in the driveway or talk to on the phone for 10 minutes.
And this does give them the
and that
3-day out.
Right. And so I go show the house, now that's where this, and this is where it's a little gray. I go show the house, that ends up being the house they want to buy, but they've canceled my agreement because they just don't know me. I mean, it might've been fine, but they want to just, figure out what they want to do.
Right.
They want to call other agents, get, some insight, but then they end up deciding they want to come back on this house. Well, if you were the procuring cause of that, if you were the reason, you took them in, you gave them all the information, this other agent hadn't even shown it to them, then
You deserve it.
you deserve it.
Mhm.
So one thing that was suggested, I think is a good idea. Like let's say that we are out looking at properties, and for whatever reason you say, you know what, I really like you, but I'm not ready to sign an agreement with anybody, and I'm really probably not going to do anything for a couple weeks anyway. You go on, you meet somebody else, and you decide to come back, and you want to, so you want to cancel the agreement. We cancel it, but then you decide you want to buy that first house that I showed you. I think if somebody's canceling the agreement, I would probably print out the MLS data sheets for the properties that you show them and have them sign them as part of that release, and then attach it. Then you've got documentation. Yes, I showed this to you. I don't know that you necessarily have to have that, but I mean, it gives you documentation and acknowledgement and a conversation with the buyer. Like, look, if you decide to come back and buy this property, I understand you don't want to sign an agreement with me for 60 days or 30 days or a year. But if you come back and decide to buy one of these houses that we've looked at today, compensation is going to be owed to me. And then if there's a reason why they don't want to do that, at least it opens. I think again, it's conversation and communication.
But according to this now, it can be one-sided, so they could cancel without you even presenting anything. You don't have to have them sign something based on what you presented. But then the other side of that is what would you say is a GTAR president? Madam President. I love saying that. Sexy. So, Madam President, what would you say when it comes down to how, let's say I'm Joe Public and I went and I had to sign because I got somebody off of online and they showed me a house and I signed, but I'm like, whoa, I didn't mean to do that. Then I can't track them down. I can't find them. How do I do that? Do I just have to email them in case?
So if you'll notice on the buyer broker agreement on page 3, it's going to have the buyer broker, the associate's name and their license number, their cell phone number, their buyer broker email address, their brokerage name, the name of the managing broker, the managing broker's telephone number and email address. So, so then they do know who to reach out to, because we had a situation that was brought to
So that needs to be completed.
This needs to be completed, and I think it's very important that the consumer make sure this is completed.
And I think that's a huge thing for both sides. Make sure that that's all there, because and I think same on the buyer, because if you want to relieve yourself of that responsibility, also you need
you
got to
know where to be able
to
to send it to them and email them, call them, whatever. And it does,
But so to me, if you did an email and you have it saved and time stamped, then that would actually constitute that I would think.
Yeah.
That'd be, or a text would probably be the same.
Yeah, and it has to be in writing. So you want an email, and we talked a lot about that, and that was why we wanted to make sure.
Instead of if I decided 3 days ago.
Oh, they have to cancel it through writing, so there's evidence of that.
So, say they sign something with somebody they don't know, and then they start working with you, and you go to write an offer and you say, have you signed this? And they say, oh yeah, I did. They're going to need to give that 3 days notice in writing to whoever it was. We did have somebody give an example in one of these meetings when we were collaborating on this, that there was an agent and no one, their own broker couldn't get a hold of them. And the buyer was like, well, what am I supposed to do? And that we don't want that. It does happen more than we think.
Unfortunately.
And like
very
for
unfortunately.
the three of us, we
Oh
can't
my
even
God.
We
comprehend
do this
that.
full time.
Because we are literally
phones
like
right here.
6 a.m, 11 at night.
I have text.
you know.
It's like somebody texts me and I don't text them back immediately. I'm like, sorry.
I
I was
know.
like
I have
getting
clients-
married or.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I was having surgery.
No.
But I have clients that tell me that all the time. They're like, "Oh my gosh, you need to take a break. You need to stop, or you don't have to respond to me immediately." But the same thing we do. It's a guilt. But so these people that just don't respond to people for days and weeks, I don't.
And I worry a little bit because this is kind of, that was one of my biggest concerns. This helps keep me out of that mindset. And I know you discussed this with me after listening to some of our ranting podcasts, because I was like, that's not fair for a derelict agent to lock someone in and then go, you're mine.
Yeah.
I'll get to you when because it'd be really good. Well, I'll get to you when I get to you,
Yeah.
and I'll show you what I want to show you when I want to show it, and good luck because you're locked in.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, that is not what is best for that consumer. And
Absolutely
that is
not.
at the heart of what this lawsuit was about. And for those
Or the brokerage,
or the
even,
broker,
because the
it's not
brokerage
good
is
for-
being
yeah.
represented in that way, and they
Right.
don't even know it.
Right.
So
Right.
no, I think that's
Right.
huge. That's a huge change for me that I love.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
have another part of this. So I had my very first signature on the new buyer broker agreement
Okay.
from my buyer. So it was interesting going through it and realizing some of the things, even though I'd read through it, I hadn't actually put one together and all the
Yeah.
signatures and all the everything you have to fill out. So I think this is a question that's good for buyers, sellers, and agents to hear. This is a first-time home buyer. And for me to explain, all right, here's how it now works, and pay me 3%, is an awkward
It's
conversation
very
to have. I am not going to lie. And luckily, this is a person who trusts me, and
Right.
I walked him through the whole process. But filling that out and explaining, okay, you're either going to pay me this percentage, you're going to pay me this, what's the second one? It's flat fee.
Mhm.
And then, or there's
Retainer,
retainer, or
Right.
there's a third
which
option.
is just basically something covered in the additional provisions, I would think.
So as you look at those, you like, we put 3% in there, but the goal, and hopefully I'm saying everything correctly, but the goal was that we could find a property that they were offering 3%, or we would put that as a concession into the
Right.
contract, because he doesn't have that 3% to pay me. If we come across a property that's 2%, that's fine. Then I'll do the 2%. But you can't take more than that. So if somebody out there, I have a property right now that they're offering 3% plus a $1,500 incentive. Somebody wouldn't be able to take that incentive unless they put it in the buyer broker agreement.
So the only thing about that, this whole
Well-
agreement was supposed to be based on transparency. So I just heard an argument about that, which actually makes sense. That if we go to people and to the public and say, look, we'll work real hard to just find someone who'll pay that 3%. That is what they're trying to get us away from.
Exactly.
Because they're trying to get us away from that, because they think that when they think that there's, we've been arguing this is less transparent, which I still think it is. But in their mind, and in the law, and in the settlement's mind, the transparency issue that they're talking about is that when we say the seller is going to pay it, that they really believe the buyer has been paying it anyways in the price coming off the top. And so to say that, we're basically not telling the truth, that it is the buyer's responsibility, but it's the buyer's responsibility now to get the seller to either cover it or not. So I think what you have to say in that situation is that we will always negotiate and try to get that for you so that it covers it, and you don't have to accept something that they won't pay that.
Yeah.
But not that I'm only going to show you properties where somebody
No,
does
and that wasn't it. But he wanted to know, okay, which properties do I know you're going to be covered on those 3%? I want to know which properties those are. And then which properties that I'm gonna have to put that
Yeah.
into the
But
contract.
nothing in
and then
writing
maybe-
holds up. So if I say anything to you or I send you a text that the seller's gonna pay 3%, that no longer holds up. The
Because
only
it's
thing
an
that holds up is
offer
the
of
contract.
compensation. I mean, even if the seller is offering that compensation, let's
Oh,
say
you
you've got
still
a
have to
three,
put it in the contract.
right, but you have a
Okay, so
$300,000
acceptable
house
offer.
and
That's right.
your buyer goes in and offers 250 and the seller was offering a 3% compensation to the buyer's agent. They might say, well, I'm certainly not going to do 250, but I would do 275. But if I do that, then I don't want to be responsible for, I mean, because it's all going to be a
And that's the
negotiation.
difficulty I think we're gonna
Yeah.
be facing as buyer's agent is that we could be, all that work and you could be one of the first ones cut out of the deal. So I think that's gonna be one thing we're gonna have to deal with and figure out.
And that's kind of scary. Like
That
I
is
said,
scary.
we start out
Yeah.
at
'Cause
zero
suddenly
every
we're
single day.
negotiable
Yeah.
where we weren't before. We had to
Mhm.
agree to something and now that can be agreed. Honestly, can be agreed between those parties. So that's gonna be an interesting thing we're gonna have to deal with.
So
But there's
agents-
there's a separate form for that cooperative now.
Yeah, so there's a compensation agreement.
Yeah.
Yeah, so agents make sure and fill that out, or you could fill it out and then turn it in, and you didn't put that in there, and
They
suddenly you're
said
not getting paid
today,
anything.
you have to put check and in the empty space in the contract, put that attached, the
Condition.
cooperative,
The cooperative compensation
compensation.
supplement.
and that they're going to have that written in on the new form of the contract, but if it is not checked, then it doesn't apply. So yeah, you have to have that. What I like is we're not just writing it in some weird verbiage in the additional provisions. We actually have
Yeah.
a form. So I think it's all getting to be more standardized and it's a little bit more like this is just a standard form that comes along with
Yeah.
it. That's the agreement. Because I think the public understands you have to pay people for their work.
Right, nobody's
You
going to work
do.
for free. No, none of our consumers would go and do a job for free. And I don't think the majority of them expect us to do it for free. And so let's kind of flip it a little bit and let's talk about the seller for a minute. This has all been in the media and in the news, and I'm sure you've
Not necessarily accurate
not,
either.
I mean, 99% of it. I mean, I know you and I went back and forth. Was it in March? And I was like, oh my gosh. And, we were talking about how inaccurate it was. But when you are really sitting across the dining room table from those sellers and you actually explain it to them and you have the conversation with them, my experience has been that the majority of them understand it. They want to offer compensation. They understand the way it works. And so it really just becomes about making sure you're explaining it well, you're communicating, and then you are, you're getting it all documented and you explain, how it's going to work during a negotiation, and how it benefits them to offer the compensation, and what could happen if it doesn't. But at the end of the day, it's all negotiable.
And
So
again,
could
we've
you-
dealt with discount brokers and commissions for a long time. We used to have less recourse than we have now because used to, if it was in MLS and that was what they agreed to, you stated you're going to show it and just deal with whatever they agreed to. And that was kind of like you could get in trouble for not doing it. But now it's all transparency. You can say, no, I don't want to do it for that. I don't.
So if you sign the second one, so let's say you do the retainer,
Okay.
then could you put compensation in your offer to the seller?
I'm not sure I'm understanding what
Okay, so the first choice is, here's what you're gonna pay me, Mr. Buyer, or
Okay.
Mrs. Buyer, Miss Buyer. Second one is, here's the retainer the buyer is going to pay
The
me.
retainer comes out of that number.
So if they,
It's not on
if you,
top of that.
so
number.
yeah, so if you,
Or instead of that
Right.
number.
right,
Yeah.
right. It would be like
Okay.
you and I start working together and I say, hey, I charge my buyers a $500 retainer fee. And when we close on a property, that will be credited whether you're paying the compensation or the seller, however.
So you could check two
So
boxes
you could check
there.
2 boxes.
But
Okay.
it's not a transaction fee, right, Cindy?
No.
It's not a transaction fee. So
No.
everyone needs to
But
understand that.
if you're charging a transaction fee, you can charge a transaction fee, but again, the whole compensation has to fall within what you've agreed on.
Okay.
And you
Okay.
should charge a transaction fee to everyone
Right.
you work with, not just certain
Correct.
people you work with.
Correct.
So, okay, so here's another question. One of the things with this is that we can no longer put buyer broker compensation on MLS.
Right.
So California MLS is now putting that in there as a seller or buyer concession, whichever way you would buyer or seller, as a concession.
Okay.
Like, here's a concession of 3%. Can you do that? I kind of thought none of that could
I
be on
think
MLS.
they're trying to get they're challenging the
Yes.
law by doing
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's where we are as an MLS. That's
No.
my understanding.
But there could be a domino effect
Right.
if
Sure.
that
I
goes
mean-
over
Well,
well.
I think I think that each state is going to kind of do things that the way they see fit and what they want to do and how they do it.
Right back where we
And
were.
I do think we're going to end up, because the funny thing, and I
You
think
just gotta
Cheryl
do
said
it
this,
legally until that.
the
happens.
DOJ is the one who wanted us to put compensation in the MLS to begin with, so it was more transparent. And now they're saying we want you to take
But
it
they
out.
didn't allow that to be entered into evidence in the court
Right.
hearing that this all came out of.
So, and we've talked about several times on the podcast, it would have been more transparent to put both sides.
Correct.
Because
would
occasionally
love
you
that.
work with a listing agent
Yeah.
and they charge 7%. They're keeping 5 of it and only offering to.
I'm
buyer
all in.
broker
I
compensation.
love full transparency.
Me too.
So to me, I don't
Sure,
understand
me too.
why we're taking something off and not put. I mean, that's
I
problematic.
think at the end of the day, we're just going to have to let this play out, and we're going to have to see what the repercussions are. And unfortunately, I think there's going to be some negative repercussions.
Mhm.
And then we're going to adjust. And, I mean, I don't think it's going to be any next week or next month or next year, but I think we're slowly going to come back to where we
Yeah.
are, because it is more, and maybe it'll come back, and that is the way.
But I
It'll
will
be,
say, I love
you
some
know,
of the.
Mhm.
both sides will be in
I
there.
love some of the protections that we
I do
and
too.
the consumers have, because the buyer side has always been kind of the Wild West in some ways.
Mhm.
Like, well, I just hope it works out, and it always
Yeah.
sort of did. But so while we're on track, while we've got you, who enforces this? The president of GTAR?
No.
She's queen and
Madam
sheriff.
President, Your Honor.
No. So, it's the MLS basically in the local boards,
Yeah.
but what we are not going to call you up and say, Cindy, you're out showing houses. We need to see your buyer broker agreement. It's really going to be the brokerages. The brokerages are going to need to make sure, just like, and I mean, I think Chenoweth is amazing at this. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes, frankly, to the point where I'm like, oh, this
Our
audit.
audits
Is
are
it-
so strict,
Yeah.
which is a great
I
thing.
mean,
but
like, it's like, oh, you didn't dot that I on page 6, and you're like, okay, sorry. But I'm being facetious, but I mean, I do really appreciate it, because they make sure that we are doing things right and that we're following the laws and the rules. And so it's really going to be the broker. But if somebody doesn't do what they're supposed to do and somebody makes a complaint, then we will, we have the
It'll
right
be
to
a
ask for
GTAR board complaint instead of an OREC.
or MLS board
Yeah.
complaints. Because the way, because you've got GTAR, it has their own board, and then MLS Tech has their own board. So it'll be MLS, but of course GTAR governs.
But
MLS.
normally on most things statewide, it goes to an OREC complaint that something is not right, and this is not falling under that umbrella. This
No.
will be handled by.
Yeah,
the
it'll be
MLS and by the
handled.
boards.
Now, I mean, I imagine there's things that'll get, they'll go from local to state, and none of us are gonna have that. But
This is a weird question. Let's say we just want to immediately dissolve the agreement. It's 3 days is what you say you can get, but you could let someone out. You could say,
I think you
release
could,
you
because
now.
if both people are mutually agreeing to that, then I think you just
I mean, the
sign
3
it.
days is a
and it's
nice
done.
buffer, but you could
Yeah.
say, I'm done,
Yeah.
we're done. Okay.
And we really did that because we wanted, number one, the consumer to have time to locate whoever they needed to locate, but also, I mean,
Reaction time.
the very rare chance that we, get to have a vacation, or, God forbid we're
Yeah.
sick and
Or
somebody's
defend
trying to,
yourself.
yeah, I mean, because I
Because if
think,
somebody's wanting to cancel, I go, well, dude, wait, like,
what happened,
let's work it out. I mean, that doesn't mean it has to be canceled. Though you have 3 days to go. Oh, we're not going to do that. Okay. I mean,
Right.
it gives you a cool down period a little
Sure.
bit.
Well, and I think, unfortunately, I think you're going to have agents who don't understand it, who then, are explaining to somebody, and they think they got, I got to get in this house, and they get in this house, I have to go to the listing agent, but I already signed it with this person. And if this agent's not explaining to them that's not the case, you can have your own agent bring you in. I mean, and sometimes, how many times have we had somebody call us and they start telling us something that somebody's told them, and we're like, oh, that's not right.
Yeah.
And it's really about educating them and helping them
Right.
understand the process. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
all right, where are we
We
at?
covered most of that part. The open house, that doesn't count.
I'm so glad about that.
What
Yeah.
is the difference between a written agreement and a buyer broker agreement? So you can have a written agreement. You can have any written agreement when you show a house that states the things that you have. You don't have to use this form. There's so many things that are specifically needed that this form covers.
Yes.
That it would be a mistake in my mind to do that unless your broker has come up with their own version, which I also think is kind of a mistake. but I think that that's a really important one. So
Well, what I would caution people is, yes, you can create your own. Your brokerage can create your own. You can use whatever you want.
Say no.
But what we are hearing from across the country is that there's starting to be lawsuits filed because somebody's going and saying, well, why did you use your own form or you used your brokerage form when the governing body of the real estate industry in your state says to use this form?
Yeah.
And, I mean, the first thing, an attorney is going to do is say, well, this, and this, contradict this, and this is why you used it because you were only looking out for your best interest. So there's kind of strength in using the documents that the real estate commission, their attorneys, they've had outside attorneys look at a lot of this, and so
is
I mean
it
they've done.
Is it copywritten form?
No.
Because the contract is copywritten, so if you change anything, then the copyright doesn't hold up.
Yeah.
But if you don't change anything marking out, then the contract is intact undeniably. So that's an interesting thing too.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That might
So
be a little over my
then-
pay grade. I don't know.
Wait until you have a client who is a real estate attorney.
Yeah.
Go through that contract. I'm like, wait, what? What do you want to change?
You want to do what? Yeah.
Sorry, I get kind of nerdy and in the weeds and stuff.
Sure.
Can I leave the compensation section blank and fill in it after the buyer has selected a property? No.
No, because then it's not enforceable at that point.
And I think this is an important point too. Like for those of us that sell kind of mid to upper level homes, the percentage that we can put in there, we can cover ourselves. If you're selling, let's say $100,000 to $150,000 homes on a regular basis, you may want to put 4% or whatever to make sure that you're getting coverage for transaction fee for I think that when you start breaking down how much people make that sell, those homes that are a lower price point, they may have to raise their compensation level appropriately too. So I think that's an interesting thing. You can, I think compared to the transaction fee, which if you do one for one, you got to do all for all. That on your percentage, you can vary that based on kind of what they're looking for, what's an average payment for that. I guess new construction people could go a little higher because you have bonuses and things.
I think if you're trying to make sure that if there's bonuses and there's compensation from the seller being offered that you're covered, then yes. But I really think, if you're doing it for 2% for you and 3% for you and 4% here, regardless of the price point, that could be why did you I understand as
because if they're making us establish compensation up front, and I know that if I sell homes that I need to make 3.5% on to cover my expenses and my time and expenses, I'm like, I sold a lot of houses to my parents from HUD auctions, and what is the compensation?
And that bought you an island where?
Yeah, right. But what is if I was
head.
doing that for people that weren't my parents, would I want to raise that compensation and say, I'll do this for you and I'll take the time to do that, but I know they're going to pay me $1,500, but I really need $3,000 to make that worth my time. So I just think that those are the times when you can do that. If they're going to make us establish it up front, I don't think we have to be as worried about the uniform part of it.
Right.
I think that gives us more, and I just worry that we're going to get so bogged down in that we have to do it a certain way. They're limiting us, so we need to make sure we set that at the number that's going to work for us.
Yeah.
So, is there anything else that's a big change that you would like to make sure we get across?
Madam President.
It's so funny. Somebody said that the other day, and I was like, "Oh, they're talking to me."
And you were also the GTAR Realtor of the Year.
I was actually the Oklahoma Realtor of the Year.
Oklahoma
Yeah,
Realtor
so-
of the Year. That's
yes,
right.
and I am very proud of that. And it was
You
a
should
huge
be.
shock. And I stand in that room and I look out and I see so many people who are much more deserving than I am.
Oh, stop
but
it! You deserved
it. It was very humbling, but I'm very honored to have that.
And you deserved every
Thank
bit
you.
of it. I've
Thank
known
you.
you for a long time.
Mhm.
So
I
then
think the important things, not so much maybe on here. What did you start?
I was going to say, it does say residential houses that are 4 residential dwellings are, so if it's a 4-plex or below, you have to have this.
Mhm.
If it's above a 4-plex, it's a commercial, I guess, property in their
I
mind.
think that's.
If it's vacant land, I don't
I'd
think
say
you have to have it, but you should.
I would do it. Yeah.
If it's
I'm gonna do this with all my buyers, regardless of what they're
right.
buying. And I have been doing it. I have used this, and again, we used it differently, but and I've already had a buyer have to pay a portion of my commission, and I had a buyer who paid all of my commission.
And
it wasn't
I
nearly
haven't
as
been there yet. That just makes me nervous.
Let's just say this though, as a people that have been doing this for a long time, who love our business, love our profession, I think it's very important that we all recognize that everyone who is a professional is doing this form now.
Yeah.
So when you go out to the public and you're afraid of, oh, I don't want to do it, which I get because I haven't used these forms. I've never used these forms before.
I used
But
my
now
first
that
one
it's
today.
required, and I know that everyone is doing it, then this is the way I go to the public and say, you're going to be under contract with someone. Would you like to be under contract with me? Because when you go somewhere, you can say, I'm already under contract with someone.
Well,
I think there's a certain amount of, it's like the Marx Brothers sales thing. Like, you know, oh, I'm working with someone. You know, like there's that part of it where it's like, I've got this. So it gives you the public a certain shield to go out.
Empowers them.
Yeah.
It does. It really does.
Huh,
And here's
I
the
thought about it that
thing.
way.
I think that we've all, especially the last few years with the craziness of real estate. I mean, nothing's been typical for the last 4 years. And so I think we need to get back to doing buyer consultations. And there's so much benefit to that for you and the consumer. I've sat in a room with somebody that I thought would be just lovely to work with, that I was a good match for, and realized, you know what? I'm not the person to help them. And I've been able to help them find somebody that would be a better match for them. And I've had, buyers come in and meet me, and we've talked, and we both hit it off, and it's been great. But you kind of establish that foundation. You can go over everything. And I think then it's not as intimidating as when you're standing at the end of the driveway going, hey, I need you to sign this for me real quick. Or, hey, I'm going to send you something to sign in dot loop before I meet you at this house. And they're like, well, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And so I think we need to get back to doing more of that, and kind of building that foundation of that relationship, because at the end of the day, at the heart of it all, it is the relationship.
I just think it's funny because I got my license when I was 18, and I'm a lot older than that now. And
You don't look it.
Thanks, no to Botox. But the one thing that I think is so interesting is I've never ever heard another realtor say, "What a normal market we're in." We always think, "Oh, this is the strange market, weird market, whatever, for whatever reason." I think it's always a weird market. So I think that kind of like someday it's going to get to normal. It's sort of
what
hysterical.
is normal?
Like, what is normal? But the one thing I think is really interesting: does the buyer broker agreement, is it between the broker and the buyer, or is it between the associate and the buyer? Because like the listing agreement is actually a broker.
Because I'm the one that signed it when I did that today.
But you're the one that signed your listing agreement too. So
Sure.
I should know the answer to that question. I think it's the broker.
I do too. I think because we're all working under our broker.
Right.
So if you had an issue and say you're with Chenoweth, then you really could say, that associate, I'm fine with somebody else, but I don't want that associate.
Yeah.
So,
And I would hope.
hopefully that's not a problem, but
I don't think this is going to happen nearly as much as we think. But of course, what do we all do? I mean.
But if someone changes brokerages in the middle, like.
Oh, yeah.
Did they have the agreement with the broker, or did they have the agreement with the agent? I think that has to be answered.
And I think I would probably say it's going to be terminated and then redone.
We will find out, and
we
will
will find out.
Yeah.
So,
A lot still TBA.
Well,
TBD.
and I
like
have
you
spent-
said earlier, who knows?
Who knows?
August 14th,
and I've
this
spent
could all
hours
be.
and hours on all this, and there's times where I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know that. Or, I think it's almost like information overload.
Yeah.
And somebody asked in a meeting the other day, said, well, how is GTAR governing this or policing this? And I was like, we're not. And I meant like we're not gonna we're not uploading that. We're not gonna ask you to upload your into MLS. We're not gonna police that everybody has.
Oh, I see what you're
saying. But if there's a problem, but this person was like, you're not, and she was like horrified a little bit, and I was like, oh, I think I just answered that wrong.
I think that's kind of like, you don't go around to see if everyone is speeding or not, but if they get caught, then they better have a driver's license when you catch them. I think it's more like, you could probably get away with doing it for a long time without this, but when it comes down to the cooperative agreement, you gotta have it. So
I mean, you're breaking the law, and I mean, if you know me, I'm a rule follower. But I mean, I think what we none of us want to do is make somebody else feel uncomfortable.
Yes.
We feel uncomfortable about it. And I think the consumer should know that. I think other agents should know that. We all feel uncomfortable about it. But we just have to do what the DOJ is telling us to do, basically. We have to follow the rules, and we have to do what's best for the consumer. And Cheryl said this to me years ago, and I say this in my buyer consultations, my listing appointments. If you put the people here, the rest of it falls into place. And at the heart of this, you're going to continue to put the people, the consumer, the buyer, and the seller here, and the rest of it's going to fall into place. I think we're going to have some negative things happen. I think we're going to have a lot of positive things happen.
Yeah.
But I think what we've got to do is remember we're all in this together.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to call every single agent. If I've got a list of 10 houses I'm going to show, I'm not calling every agent and saying, is your seller offering compensation? What's the compensation? I don't have time for that. I'm going to show the properties because I've got my buyer broker agreement. So at the end of the day, the buyer has said, I'm going to pay you. If they don't have to do that. They don't have to buy that house. And then I'm going to go about my business, show those properties, and we're going to make it part of the offer.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing to touch on too. Let's say that the seller says, yeah, we're offering a 2% commission. And you say, well, I work for 3%. You can make an offer and ask the seller to pay 3%. They can say no. I mean,
the other thing is if I negotiate a really smoking deal for somebody and I get their price way down and say, look, I got them way down here, but you're going to have to pay my compensation. Yeah. But it's a whole lot less to pay me than what they were going to want.
Or it may be equal. That was my buyer that paid my commission on a deal in a couple
that's like
ago.
if you have someone who's paying cash or has the money.
But he all day long would have preferred to pay me than give more money to the seller. And it was really almost the exact same amount. But he knew me. He knew I was working for him. He trusted me. So when it came down to take the seller's counter here, or take, they'll take your counter, but you pay the commission. He's like, well, I'll do that all day long because I'd rather pay you.
Oh, wow. But they have to have the cash to pay you.
Well,
they can't roll that into their mortgage.
In this situation, they did.
So people may not have that money.
They actually, I think there's ways to do it. I think we're still working it out.
Another thing to evolve.
But that is going to evolve because they've even with veterans now they're saying they can pay their own. They've never been allowed to do that. Right. I think the government is freaking out a little bit. But they can't roll it into their
loan right now. And I will tell you, as angry as everybody is, or a lot of people are with NAR. I was in DC at these legislative meetings in May, and I, with my own eyes, saw the NAR lobbyists. And I sat in Kevin Hearn's office. We were in Mr. Brasheen's office. I mean, we were in all these offices, and let me tell you, it was very clear that lobbyist had been in and out of those offices. I mean, there was a familiarity that wasn't just a dog and pony show.
Sure.
And they fought and fought and fought for that. And so did, some of our leaders. And we've talked about this. I mean, I don't always agree with all their politics, but I mean, that was a huge win because the head of the VA did not want them to be able to do that. Now, they can't roll it in their loan. And that's a really important. But it is important. And I think.
And I love what you said though. And I think we had to say this because, whatever your politics are, and we are so heated in our politics. And, this kind of stuff has kind of made me go on both sides of the fence,
Yeah.
But it's like, at the end of the day, our profession, it's been an interesting thing for me because it's been a bit of a wake-up call on that, I believe what I believe, but at the end of the day, I have to make a living.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of felt like they're going to come in and just tell us, well, sorry, your living is so insignificant. We're just going to take you out of the formula to save everyone 3%. That's what we kind of felt at the beginning.
Right.
And I think that's why everyone reacted. It's like, who are you to tell us that we just don't matter and that you can just have a system work? I mean, they've never had a system that works when they try to do that. They've tried it for years.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work. So I'm not afraid of it lasting. And I think now they're all starting to go, oh, wait, we went too far in how we were saying that. But it's taken the lobbyists to get everything kind of at a place. So it's a very difficult time. There's no lying about that.
No.
It's a difficult time to be adjusting. I think the one thing I do like is if it truly ends up being more transparent and
absolutely,
then I think that's a good thing.
I'm all for it. I mean, and I think the majority of us we would rather have more transparency than less. And I think it'll all
But if I have benefited from buying, I have benefited from buying my houses and getting the 3% from the other side going along, getting that. So for me, when I sell my house, I want to offer that courtesy to the younger people that are buying my house. Or I think it's a little bit of like we've benefited from that, and now so I think we're redefining what it's called. So if we say I'm going to make that a concession that I'll pay that, then I'll do that. But in the long run, I want to do what's right and what's been done for me. And I think at first it was kind of like, well, these people have benefited all this going up, but now they want to go, I'm not doing that at the end. And then there are going to be those people who do that, but I think they're going to suffer in the long run.
I think they will too.
They're going to not pay the 3, and they're going to lose 5 or 10% in what they get. Yeah. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me here. It was fun.
So educational, and I have to tell you, I feel better every time I talk with you or listen to the webinar or I see the new form. Each baby step, I think, is getting us a giant leap from where we were in March.
And I think it's bringing us together as a profession.
I think so.
I think that's a good thing. Negative utopia, but we are coming together, so that's good.
Well, and I do want to really give kudos to the Contracts and Forms Committee at OREC.
Oh, amen.
But the OREC staff as well, because they have worked so hard and so quickly. And
the webinar today was really good, and you can go watch it too.
And they're going to have others, I believe.
Because I thought it was really, it was the information needed, but not too much, and not trying to fill an opinion. Just this is where we come to. So.
When we post the promos for this webinar, I'll put in the comments section the link to that webinar. So if anybody wants to go back and watch it, because if you put the link on Facebook, then you're sending people away from Facebook. Facebook won't show your post to anyone. So I'll put it in the comments section.
Okay.
And I will applaud Cindy for doing that.
Me too, because I don't know what they're talking about.
Hey, thank you so much.
Thanks
I
for
know this
having
went a
me.
little longer, and we had some technical issues getting going,
Okay.
but we appreciate you hanging with us, and I hope you'll come back a lot, because I think
would
you're
love to come back.
very valuable, and I think that we really, Cindy and I's big thing is that we both love to mentor. We really love this profession, and so I think there's been a disconnect in the past between people running the boards and doing things and agents, and so I'm just so glad that it's you, and I think you do deserve it.
Well,
I think you deserve every recognition you've
Thank you.
gotten, and I've known you and watched you as a professional for years and years, so that's not just blowing smoke up here.
I appreciate that.
I really mean that.
Well,
so.
I appreciate that.
And,
I will.
and how many times we've sat down at a broker's open and just talked and just gave each other that we can do this and
Because we
advice.
love it.
Yeah, and I think at the heart of it, that for me is really, because people are like, why do you do this? And sometimes like, I don't know.
Because
I really
we
don't.
love it.
But it really, I think at a certain point, we owe it to our industry to give back in some way. This is giving back. My way of giving back may be different, but we need to be advocates for ourselves, for our clients, for our industry. And I am really proud of, and not just me, in the board we have now, but I'm really proud of what GTAR has done, the environment there, the culture there, and it has been a lot of hard work over the last few years, especially. And I would just encourage everybody to get involved a little bit, because I think it's a lot different, and we want everybody's voice and opinion to be heard.
That's my next step. I'm going to do that because I have.
And I'm going to applaud you for it.
Sometimes you're just the little gerbil on the wheel,
that's pretty much me.
My volunteer work is camp. Sorry.
Yeah, and that's okay. That's okay. But you guys are doing this, and you mentor. I know you all are too. You go in the office, and somebody comes and knocks on the door, and they ask a question. And sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't have time. And I've had to learn to shut my door, and sometimes just, I've got a note on my door that says, if you knock and I don't answer, please leave me alone. Which makes me feel horrible if you know me.
Cheryl had on my door, it says Jack Wallace Mastermind Office.
Yeah.
Which I was like, ha, that's funny. And then I'm like, oh wait, now people come to me. And I'm like, okay, that works. I like it. I've been doing this a long time.
Yeah.
It's not that we're that much smarter. Maybe you are. No. I think it's just doing it over and over. Yeah. It's like anything, you just do it enough. Talk about it enough, you get really
and
good
you're willing
at
to
it.
share, and you have a passion about it.
Absolutely.
And I think, somebody in the office texted me the other day, and they said, I just want you to know, I see how hard you're working. I see how passionate you are. And, I just want you to know that we see it. And, it was nice to hear that, because sometimes I think we're in the, what's the word I'm looking for? In the
Trenches.
trenches. And you're like, man, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? But then you see that, I'm honored to have been a part of this, and it's been a lot of work, and it's been incredible to sit in those meetings with all these people from across the state that are far brighter than I am and with a lot of experience, and collaborate. And you learn. I think you become a better person, a better realtor, a better
So
everything.
if somebody does want to volunteer and do what you're talking about, how do they get involved in that?
So OAR's committee applications, the deadline was last week, but GTARs open up, I believe, at the end of August, and they go to the end of September, early October. So I would watch for that. They send a newsletter out every week, and when those committees open up, and so they ask you to sign up for 3. And I had a lot of people that were like, "Oh, I can't do 3." Well, if you get put on all 3, just email back and say, "Hey, I can only do this one and this one, or I can only do this one." But
I only want the fun one.
right. Well, we have lots of fun committees.
Done with the nerdy ones.
Yeah, we've got those too.
So then on, is there a requirement on like how long you have to be in the business or have been a realtor to do those?
Some of the committees you have to be a realtor member. And so you go in and there's an application, there's a fee, then you're a voting member. So there are committees that only a realtor member can be a part of. And then there's other committees that anybody can be. And then there's some that, they want you to have a little experience or whatever. But
which makes sense. Yeah.
There's a lot of new agents who get involved.
And that's for new agents. It's a great way sometimes to just go and listen.
Well, I think you pick up a lot from being around people. Now, I will say, like, if you're in your first year of business and you're trying to just navigate being a realtor, get your continuing ed done and get some things under your belt. But if you've been in the business 2 to 5 years or longer, I think start giving back somewhere where you can, because if nobody gave back and nobody volunteered their time,
I think there's a more selfish reason to do that, and I think that is like we have had our relationship for a long time. We've had our relationship for a long time, and if something's happening in real estate that I don't know, we do this all the time.
Gosh.
Hey, I don't know this area. Tell me about this, or we'll go back and forth. And I always have time for you, and I know you always have time for me.
Absolutely.
But then the other side of it is, when you're showing houses, I'll be honest, when someone's showing a house and I've worked with them and they were great to work with, I may not steer, but I may make a little bit more encouragement of like, I know this person, they're not going to let the deal blow over stupid stuff.
I've had clients ask me that, I've had clients say, have you worked with this realtor before? Do you know how they work? Are they going to be fair? Are they going to, are they going to be able to explain things well to their client? And so, I don't, I agree.
Or if people see your name on a sign, they go, oh, John and I worked really hard to build our reputation and to be people that people went, I like to work with them.
Yeah.
So when they see the sign, they go, I want to show that house and I would like my people. Yeah. So I think that it's important.
There are some agents now that when they bring a buyer, I require them to send me the information that their buyer can afford that house, because they've bought leads and they've shown up at houses where their people were not qualified.
Well, I just had that happen.
That makes me so mad.
Yeah, another agent, and I followed up, and she said, oh, they turned out to be a phony, and it was a very high-end house, and all the information she had given me, I would never have thought that. And we didn't actually get to the point of them previewing the house. They were coming from out of town, but it was.
And that's hard.
And she was so embarrassed. But I think we got to remember sometimes that's we're asking people to get up and leave their homes, and if you can't really buy it, it's not just there for your entertainment.
It's not a showcase. It's not a designer showcase.
Yeah.
But I would think sometimes that's even good when they don't want to do that to you if you're somebody that they have respect for, and they go, because I'll say, do you know these people? Have you met them?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know? And if they start going, I'm like, well, why don't we get a little further in? Because I've had people, I'll tell some of my sellers, you can say you don't want anyone in your house who isn't qualified. There has to be a certain level of qualification if that's what you want.
I even put in my broker's remarks, must be pre-qualified. But there are certain agents, like I said, I'll ask, please send me that letter because you burned me before.
Yeah.
Oh, I've had them go in deals and then not they're going to come. Like the one time I was like, well, okay, we'll go ahead, and they didn't ever, and then they just decided not to do it because they couldn't get a loan, and like the loan was going to be too high.
Uh-huh.
Like, did they talk to somebody before.
I know.
Even
Again,
a
and
current
I think that's another
current
reason.
one is really important.
Yeah.
Because 6 months ago, the rates were different. Now
Yeah.
it's probably better.
Yeah. So something one of you said just now. So one thing I do want to make sure is I don't have to share my buyer broker agreement with the listing agent to show a property. You know, it's not, that is, I mean,
It's
I
between the buyer
wouldn't
and
call that
you.
listing agent and say, hey, send me a copy of your listing agreement.
Interesting.
So and that was there, I've heard that a couple times, less frequently than the last, you know, I mean, in the last month or so than I had a few months before. And I
Interesting.
think this is a little confusing, but you know, somebody in our office was trying to schedule an appointment when this all started to kind of hit the media, and the agent said, well, I need you to send me a copy of your buyer broker agreement before I can schedule the appointment. No, I mean, you have to have faith that that person's doing what they're supposed to do. That buyer, when they make the offer, and that agent need to make that part of the offer, the compensation supplement, and you need to follow that. But I'm not going to call and ask you for your listing agreement before I show, and you shouldn't be asking me for my buyer broker agreement.
That's good to know.
And it is hard to know what you're supposed to. I mean, this is good
Well,
because
exactly.
it is like, well, what am I supposed to be documenting? What am I not
Right.
supposed to be? But like,
Right.
what's between which party? But
Right.
so if I'm not, if myself or my seller or my client is not a party to the document, it's not my business, basically.
Right, and that's how it's
And it
always
won't be
been.
part of our audit when
No.
we.
Whatever.
Well,
if
it'll
you
be
need-
part of your audit
If you have
within
the
your
buyer.
within your company, but yes, it won't be part
But
of
if
your
you
audit.
have the seller,
Right,
you're
right,
not going to have their buyer
Right.
broker agreement.
Right.
Okay.
Cool.
Interesting. All right.
Okay.
Well, I think we have just like,
Beating a dead horse.
yes, that's actually
Oh,
what
this-
came to my mind.
Sorry, kids, this horse ain't dead.
Yeah, no, it's
this
not.
horse is still kicking.
Yeah.
Well, as we ride off into the sunset, hopefully
Happy
you got some great information from this because Cindy Rogers is a wealth of information. So we are so honored to have you on the podcast
Thank you.
today.
I
So
enjoyed
glad
it. It
you
was
were here.
fun.
Thank
And
you.
very timely. All right. So everybody get real and we'll talk with you next week.
See you next week. Thank you.
Bye bye.